The Galactic Council was a spectacle of architectural wonder, a colossal structure suspended in space, with its crystalline towers and gleaming metallic arches designed to symbolize the unity of countless species. Representatives from all over the galaxy filled the vast council chambers, each seated behind consoles that displayed holographic readings of planetary data, and each race more unique than the last, some humanoid, others with exoskeletons or gaseous forms, each in their own way more alien than anything Zorax Vembly had ever encountered. Zorax, senior xenoanthropologist, had been tasked with a peculiar mission, to observe and understand the peculiar human species. For 6 cycles, he had studied their cultural customs, from their art to their seemingly endless and often absurd love for competitive sports. He had cataloged their strange social behaviors, their love for foods that smelled overwhelmingly strong, their obsession with a series of small, colorful objects they called toys, and their inexplicable rituals involving pieces of leather and tightly wound strings they called baseball. As much as Zorax tried to rationalize the intricacies of human behavior, there was one thing he could never understand: why they kept choosing the most illogical options, often at the cost of something far more important. And now, a man named Doug Farley was about to prove Zorax's suspicions right. "Are you sure about this, Doug?" Zorax asked, his 6 eyes blinking in disbelief. They were sitting in a small human establishment called a sports bar, a place where humans gathered to consume fermented grains, watch other humans throw and catch balls, and scream at small television screens. The smell of fried potatoes and spilled beer permeated the air, a scent Zorax found unpleasant, but not entirely intolerable. Doug Farley, a stocky man with thinning brown hair and a relaxed demeanor, sat across from Zorax with a casual grin on his face. He had been chosen to be the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council, an offer of incredible prestige. But the man across from him was not just any ordinary human. Doug Farley, despite his average appearance, was one of the few humans to ever be selected for such a position, and Zorax had been tasked with his final cultural interview to ensure humanity's representation. And yet here they were. "I'm turning it down, Zorax," Doug said, taking a slow sip from his beer. "I've got other things to do." Zorax's 4 smaller eyes narrowed in confusion. "You're rejecting the offer to represent your entire species in the Galactic Council, Doug. Do you understand what that means? You could shape the future of humanity, secure technological advances, access to galactic resources." Doug interrupted, not bothered in the slightest by Zorax's disapproval. "I understand, but you've got to understand something else too. The Cubs made the playoffs. It's the first time in 15 years. Zorax blinked. "The Cubs, the baseball team, you turned down the most prestigious position humanity has ever been offered, for a baseball game." Doug leaned back in his chair, the old wooden seat creaking under his weight. He looked at Zorax, his eyes gleaming with an intensity Zorax hadn't expected. "Yep, that's right, and you're damn right I'm not gonna miss it." Zorax's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession, a clear sign of confusion and disbelief among his species. He was clearly struggling to comprehend what was happening. "You refuse to represent Earth in an interstellar diplomatic position because of a team that throws and hits balls. The most prestigious diplomatic role any human has ever been offered, for a game." Doug shrugged, unfazed. "It's not just a game, Zorax, it's tradition, it's family, you wouldn't understand." "Family," Zorax repeated, trying to digest the word. "Your family will understand that you turned down a chance to bring glory to your species for a ball game." Doug's grin softened. "It's not just any game. My grandfather took me to my first Cubs game when I was 6. We sat in the bleachers at Wrigley Field. I still remember the smell of the hot dogs and the way the crowd would roar when the Cubs got a hit. Every year after that, we'd go to at least 10 games together. And when he died, he left me his season tickets. I've been waiting 15 years for this moment. I'm not gonna let that slip away." Zorax didn't respond immediately. His mind raced as he processed the information. It was illogical. Humans could be so calculating in some ways, yet utterly irrational in others. The notion of letting down humanity for the sake of one family tradition seemed nonsensical to Zorax, who had never experienced anything like it. "But you don't need to be at the game to watch it, Doug," Zorax continued, still puzzled. "The council chambers have access to all Earth broadcasts. You could watch the Cubs from the comfort of your office." Doug's face fell slightly, a serious look taking over. It's not the same, Zorax. It's about being there in person, feeling the crowd's energy, the tension in the air, watching the ball soar into the stands. You can't get that from a screen. Zorax tilted his head, his four eyes narrowing in curiosity. And you believe your presence, your physical presence, will influence the game's outcome. Doug hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I guess I do. Maybe it's superstitious, but every fan knows that when your team's doing well, it's a bad idea to break the routine. It's bad luck. The Cubs have been cursed for decades, longest drought in American sports history. They finally have a shot. I can't miss it. Cursed? Zorax repeated the word, clearly unsure of what Doug meant. You believe in curses. Doug chuckled lightly, shaking his head. It's not just about curses, it's about loyalty, tradition, being part of something bigger than yourself. You wouldn't get it, Zorax. But I'll tell you this, the Cubs are part of me. They're part of who I am. The alien paused, deep in thought. The human before him was, in many ways, the epitome of everything Zorax had come to expect from humans. Unpredictable, often illogical, but driven by something that seemed far more important than reason. Zorax had spent 6 cycles trying to understand the human species. Everything from their strange need to watch sports to their obsession with family, loyalty, and tradition. And in this moment, he thought he might finally understand, if only a little. Zorax leaned back in his chair, trying to reconcile his thoughts. And you would turn down an offer that could define the future of your species for baseball. Doug's face softened, a mixture of pride and guilt crossing his expression. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Zorax finally exhaled, his secondary breathing sacs releasing a heavy sigh. Then you truly are human. The stakes had never been higher, and Zorax had never been more certain that he was about to witness something that no other species in the galaxy would ever understand. Doug Farley's decision was one of deep personal commitment, one that would shape not only his own fate, but the future of humanity standing among the stars. Zorax's mind raced as he realized the full weight of the responsibility before him. He was tasked with representing humanity, yes, but in order to do so, he had to understand what made them so uniquely human. And perhaps, just perhaps, baseball was more than just a game. It was their lifeblood, their connection to something deeper than even the vast expanse of the galaxy itself. But would the Council understand that? Would they allow such an irrational, illogical being as Doug Farley to represent Earth? The question lingered in Zorax's mind as the night wore on. The answer would come soon enough. The game was about to start, and Zorax felt an unspoken pull in the air. The energy in the sports bar was electric. Humans filled the room, their voices a low hum of conversation, all eagerly awaiting the moment the first pitch would be thrown. Zorax could see the excitement in Doug's eyes as he made his way toward a table near the bar, where a few familiar faces had already gathered. It was a ritual for Doug, one that had been passed down through generations. Zorax hesitated, feeling slightly out of place. There were no other aliens in this establishment, and though he had spent time observing human customs, this was different. This was not an academic exercise. This was a personal moment for Doug. Zorax's heart, if he had one, would have been beating faster. He had been tasked with understanding this, and right now, the puzzle before him was more personal than he'd anticipated. This is it, Zorax, Doug said, pulling a seat out for the alien and smiling. Game 3 of the playoffs. The Cubs are up 2-0. If we win tonight, we're one step closer to the championship series. Zorax sat down, watching as Doug's excitement grew. It wasn't just enthusiasm, it was something deeper, something ingrained. Doug's eyes were fixed on the large screen where the game was about to start, his body leaning forward as the first pitch approached. I don't understand, Zorax said quietly, as if speaking to himself more than to Doug. This sport, it seems so trivial. Doug laughed, but it was a knowing, fond laugh. You think so? Well, it might seem like that to you, Zorax, but there's a lot more going on here than just a bunch of people hitting balls with sticks. Zorax's 4 eyes narrowed in curiosity. What do you mean? Doug paused, a contemplative look on his face as he took a sip from his beer. It's about loyalty. It's about sticking with something through the good times and the bad. The Cubs haven't won a World Series in over a century. For most of my life, they've been the laughingstock of baseball, but every year we go back. We keep coming. It's not just about the game, Zorax. It's about being part of something that's bigger than yourself. It's about tradition. Zorax, unable to fully process Doug's words, continued to watch the crowd. The energy in the room intensified as the game began. The humans around him erupted in cheers, and Zorax could feel the hum of excitement vibrating through the air. Doug was right. This wasn't about the game. It was about the tradition that bound these people together, about a history shared between fathers and sons, between strangers in a bar, united under the banner of a baseball team that had failed them time and again. Zorax could hardly comprehend why this mattered so much to Doug. But as the game continued, he started to see it in the faces around him, the joy, the anger, the frustration. When a Cubs player struck out, the groans that followed reverberated like a wave crashing against the shore. But then when a player made a solid hit, the room erupted and Zorax understood the connection. This wasn't just a sport. It was a microcosm of life itself, full of failures, but also full of hope. The game stretched on, and as the Cubs finally scored a run, Doug's excitement was palpable. He jumped to his feet, nearly spilling his beer in the process, and high-fived the person next to him. Zorax watched with a mixture of fascination and confusion as Doug's face lit up with an emotion Zorax had seen in other species. Joy, pure, unfiltered joy. It wasn't just about the game anymore. It was about something that transcended logic and reason. Doug was a part of something bigger than himself. He was, in a way, connected to the entire human race. This ritual, this tradition, bound him to millions of others, across generations and continents. "It's not just a game, Zorax," Doug said, his voice slightly hoarse from yelling. "It's family, it's community, and right now it feels like the Cubs are gonna win this thing. It's been so long. We've all been waiting for this." Zorax tilted his head, considering Doug's words. "You place this much emotional weight on a game, on a team that has never been successful." Doug nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep passion. "Yeah, because loyalty isn't about success. It's about staying with something even when everything around you tells you to quit. The Cubs are proof that you don't give up. You stick with it no matter how many times you fail." Zorax's mind raced. Loyalty. It was a concept he understood in theory, but to see it in action like this was something else entirely. Doug wasn't just cheering for a team. He was affirming a deeper part of human nature, resilience, hope, and community. Zorax had been trained to observe and analyze, but in this moment he felt something else, something that resembled empathy. "Your species is so contradictory," Zorax mused, his voice barely audible over the din of the game. "You are logical in so many ways, but your actions are often driven by emotion. It's like you don't just live in the world, you live for it." Doug smiled, his face flushed with excitement. "That's the thing, Zorax. We don't just live for it, we live with it. Every win, every loss, it's part of who we are." The game continued, and Zorax found himself leaning forward in his seat, captivated by the energy in the room. The humans around him were no longer strangers. They were all part of the same thing, the same experience, the same tradition. Zorax couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just about baseball. It was about something much deeper, something that transcended logic and reason. He didn't know what would happen next. Doug Farley's decision to reject the ambassadorship still weighed heavily on him. But as he watched Doug, caught up in the emotion of the moment, Zorax couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, Doug was onto something. The Cubs may have never won a World Series, but today, in this bar, in this moment, they had already won something far more important. And perhaps, Zorax thought, that was what made humans truly unique. Not their ability to conquer the stars or build machines that could move mountains, but their ability to find meaning in the smallest, most fleeting moments. And for the first time, Zorax understood why the Galactic Council had chosen Doug Farley. It wasn't just about the knowledge he could bring to the table or his skills in diplomacy. It was about his heart, the human heart, so full of contradictions, yet capable of a depth of feeling that no other species could match. Zorax found himself smiling despite himself. The mystery of humanity had just become a little clearer, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change the fate of the galaxy. The Galactic Council's chambers were cold and sterile, filled with the flickering hum of advanced technology and the low murmur of alien diplomats debating matters of galactic importance. Zorax stood at the front, his 6 eyes scanning the room filled with representatives from the galaxy's most powerful species. The Praxian delegate, Nyxthalin, sat at the far end of the room, her long exoskeleton shimmering in the artificial light. Her 4 upper limbs were folded neatly across her chest, and her compound eyes glimmered with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Zorax had been tasked with delivering his findings on Doug Farley, the human chosen to represent Earth in the Galactic Council. But what Zorax hadn't anticipated was the magnitude of the challenge Doug's decision presented. You want to send a middle school science teacher as humanity's ambassador. Nixthalen's voice cut through the silence, laced with incredulity. A human with no political experience, no training in diplomacy, for this baseball obsession. Zorax straightened, maintaining his composure despite the overwhelming sense of tension in the air. It's not just about baseball, Nix. It's about what the Cubs represent to humanity. It's about loyalty, tradition, and connection. Doug Farley's deep emotional attachment to the Cubs shows something that other species in the galaxy might not understand. Humans, despite their contradictions, have an incredible capacity for loyalty. It's something we can learn from. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief. Some of the more rational species, the ones who had risen to power through logic and efficiency, found it hard to fathom how something as irrational as baseball could become a key point of negotiation. I still don't see how his obsession with a baseball team can help us in galactic affairs, Nixthalen scoffed, tapping a long, slender claw against the surface of the table. Zorax turned his attention to the other delegates, many of whom were quietly listening but hesitant to speak. Doug Farley's value to the Galactic Council goes beyond his personal attachment to the Cubs. The Council's algorithm, the one that identifies human candidates for the ambassadorship, selected Doug for his empathy, his adaptability, and his capacity for leadership. He may not have political experience, but what he has is something far rarer, a deep connection to his species and a natural ability to foster unity. There was a pause as Zorax's words hung in the air. Doug Farley had rejected the position twice because he felt that his connection to the Cubs was more important than anything else. But in that decision, Zorax had come to understand that Doug's heart was more valuable than any political strategy or diplomatic acumen. In his refusal, Doug had demonstrated the very qualities that made him an ideal candidate for the role. Doug Farley embodies humanity's essence, Zorax continued, his voice steady. He represents the part of humanity that is unpredictable, emotional, and driven by something deeper than mere logic. The Council needs someone who can relate to the human condition, not just the political one. And Doug Farley, despite his reluctance, is the perfect person for the job. The Praxian delegate shifted uncomfortably, her exoskeleton pulsing in an iridescent blue. We are making a grave mistake. We are inviting irrationality into the council chambers. His personal preferences have no place in galactic diplomacy. Zorax could feel the weight of the opposition in the room, but he remained resolute. I disagree. Rationality isn't the only key to effective diplomacy. We need someone who can bridge the emotional divide between species. Doug Farley can do that. As Zorax spoke, his mind returned to the bar where he had sat with Doug, watching the excitement of the game unfold, the faces of the fans lighting up with joy, their cheers reverberating like the pulse of a living organism. Zorax understood that this wasn't just about the Cubs. It was about the shared human experience, the deep connection to something larger than oneself, and the ability to find joy in the smallest of victories. The room fell silent for a moment, the debate on hold as the delegates processed Zorax's words. Finally, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. It was the Tigran ambassador, a large, feline creature with golden eyes that shimmered as they fixed on Zorax. I agree with Zorax, the Tigran said, his voice smooth but filled with authority. We cannot ignore the humanity in humans. Doug Farley may not be the most obvious choice, but his connection to his species is what makes him valuable. If we want to truly understand humans, we must understand their loyalty to tradition, their emotional investment in their communities. Perhaps this is the best path forward. There was a moment of hesitation, but then other delegates began to speak up. The Glavathi, an insectoid species known for their empathetic abilities, nodded in agreement. Humanity's loyalty is not something we have encountered in other species. If we are to understand them, we must respect that. Nixthalen's mandibles clicked in irritation, but she didn't interrupt. Zorax could see the shift in the room. It was subtle, but it was there. The tide was turning. Zorax took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. Doug Farley's proposal may seem unconventional, but that is the very essence of humanity, innovation born from tradition. He is the right choice for the job. And with his leadership, humanity can help guide the galaxy in a way that logic alone never could. The council chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as Zorax waited for the final decision. His heart, if he had one, would have been racing, but he had done all he could. The rest was up to the council. Finally, the Supreme Counselor, a towering being of translucent blue skin and multiple limbs, spoke. "We have listened. The Council will allow Doug Farley to assume the position of Galactic Ambassador for humanity. His attachment to his traditions and his deep connection to his species will serve him well, but with one condition." Zorax's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was prepared for what came next. "The Council requests that Doug Farley bring his traditions into the Council chambers. We will accommodate his need for baseball, but it will be a shared experience, one that allows us to understand humanity in its entirety. Doug must prove that his connection to his species is strong enough to represent them in full." Zorax's mind raced. "You're allowing him to bring baseball into the Galactic Council?" The Supreme Counselor nodded. "Yes, but it will be more than a game. It will be an opportunity for us to learn about human values, their sense of community, and their emotional attachments. If Doug Farley can make that bridge, then we will follow him as humanity's ambassador." Zorax allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the breakthrough humanity needed. Doug Farley was more than just a man with a baseball obsession. He was a symbol of humanity's resilience, their unshakable bond to tradition, and their ability to find meaning in the seemingly trivial. If that was enough to sway the Galactic Council, then humanity's future was in good hands. As the delegates began to disperse, Zorax stood tall, his thoughts on the long road ahead. He had witnessed something remarkable today, not just a decision to move forward, but a willingness to embrace something human. And in the end, it wasn't the logic that won the day. It was the heart. Zorax's mind buzzed with the weight of the Council's decision. Doug Farley, a middle school science teacher with an obsession for a baseball team, was now humanity's official ambassador to the Galactic Council. But there was more to it than that. The Council had agreed to allow Doug to bring his beloved tradition of baseball into the heart of galactic diplomacy. A shocking decision, one that would reverberate across the stars. The next few cycles were filled with frantic preparations. Doug had agreed to the terms, but he didn't just want to show the Council what baseball was. He wanted to bring them into the experience. His plan was simple, not just a broadcast of the games, but the full, raw energy of the stadium, the community atmosphere, the rituals. Hot dogs, beer, the anthem, the chants. Doug Farley was determined to make the Galactic Council understand why this strange and seemingly trivial tradition meant so much to humanity. Zorax was tasked with organizing the event. The Council's chambers, usually reserved for somber diplomacy and high-level negotiations, were about to be transformed into something radically different, a place where the hum of technology would give way to the passionate roar of human tradition. Zorax could already sense the tension building. Some Council members were still skeptical of the whole idea, while others had warmed to the concept. But one thing was clear. This would be a monumental moment for both humanity and the galaxy at large. Zorax met with Doug in the weeks leading up to the event. The human ambassador was excited but nervous, his hands fidgeting with the brim of his Cubs cap as he paced back and forth. "Zorax," Doug said, looking at the alien with determination. "This is it. The Council is going to experience the real Cubs game. No more screens or transmissions. They're going to be in the middle of it. I want them to feel the energy, the excitement, the whole damn thing." Zorax studied Doug's face, noting the way his expression shifted from excitement to something deeper, something Zorax recognized as genuine responsibility. Doug wasn't just playing a game anymore. He was about to represent humanity's culture, its soul, in front of the galaxy's most powerful species. "You realize this is unprecedented, Doug," Zorax remarked. "The Council has never allowed anything like this. They will be watching you not just as an ambassador for Earth, but as a human, your passions, your rituals, your emotions." Doug paused for a moment, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "I know, but you said it yourself. The Council needs to understand humanity, and I think they'll get it when they see this." Zorax nodded slowly. "I hope you're right." The day of the cultural exchange arrived, and the Galactic Council chambers were transformed. Large, holographic projectors filled the room, displaying the iconic Wrigley Field in all its glory. The Cubs' logo shimmered against the backdrop of the vast chamber, a stark contrast to the usual coldness of the alien technology that surrounded them. Zorax was among the first to arrive, his 6 eyes scanning the room as the delegates filed in. He had never seen the Council chamber like this before, bright, warm, and filled with a strange, almost electric anticipation. The human atmosphere was contagious. It had been weeks of preparation, customs, dietary adjustments for the various species, and even simulated smells of grass, hot dogs, and popcorn wafted through the air. The council had made adjustments for every species, biology, ensuring that everyone could partake in the full sensory experience. Doug, wearing his Cubs jersey and cap, stood at the front of the room, holding a large bag of what humans called peanuts and what seemed like small cardboard containers of hot dogs. He was grinning ear to ear as he addressed the crowd of alien diplomats. "All right, folks," Doug began, his voice booming with the same passion Zorax had seen in the sports bar. "This is it. This is what it means to be human. Baseball is more than a game, it's a tradition, a way for us to connect. And now you're all going to get a taste of what that feels like." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others, mainly those who had shown some degree of curiosity, looked on with interest. Nyxthalin, the Praxian delegate who had so strongly opposed Doug's ambassadorship, sat in the back, her 4 limbs folded tightly in front of her. Her exoskeleton shifted through subtle shades of violet, but she said nothing, clearly still uncertain about the whole ordeal. Zorax observed the room with a quiet sense of pride. This was the first step toward bridging the cultural divide between humanity and the galaxy. Baseball, with its absurdity and its deep emotional connection, was humanity's offering. It was their way of showing the galaxy that their strength wasn't in their machines or their strategies. Their strength was in their hearts, complicated, chaotic, and beautiful. Doug continued, his enthusiasm infectious. "You're going to get the whole experience. We've got the game, we've got the food, we've got the beer, and we've got the Cubs, but more than that, we've got each other. So let's enjoy this. Let's celebrate what makes us human." The room began to settle as the game started. The holographic projection shifted, and Zorax could see the familiar Wrigley Field logo flash across the screen. He could even smell the faint, artificial scent of grass that had been synthesized for the occasion. It felt strange, too real for a simulation, but undeniably human. The tension was palpable, and for the first time, Zorax felt the stirring of something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just about observing a culture anymore. It was about sharing it. The crowd reacted as the first pitch was thrown, an overwhelming cheer rising from the delegates as the Cubs' batter swung and missed. Doug grinned, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's okay. They'll get it on the next one, trust me." Zorax, trying to absorb everything, watched Doug as he led the group through the game. The alien delegates seemed to be shifting from skepticism to fascination, their attention drawn more and more into the game as it progressed. Zorax could see the light in their eyes, curiosity, interest, and perhaps even a little empathy for this strange species. For the next few hours, the council members watched, not just as passive observers, but as active participants in humanity's tradition. Some of them cheered with enthusiasm, others clapped politely, and a few even laughed when an unexpected play turned the tide in favor of the Cubs. As the game neared its climax, Zorax felt the tension in the room build to a fever pitch. The Cubs were winning, and Doug's passion was infectious. Even the usually stoic Nyxthalin seemed to be leaning forward, her compound eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity Zorax had never seen from her before. And then, as the Cubs scored the final run, the entire room erupted. There were cheers, claps, and even a few delegates who could be seen trying to mimic the human gesture of a high five, though their attempts were a little less coordinated. It was a chaotic, beautiful moment of unity, a moment that transcended the boundaries of species, biology, and culture. Doug's face lit up as the final out was called, and he jumped up, roaring with excitement. "We did it! We're going to the championship!" Zorax felt a strange flutter in his chest. This wasn't just a victory for the Cubs. This was a victory for humanity, a moment where their chaotic, passionate, and deeply emotional nature had connected with the galaxy in a way that no diplomat, no strategic maneuver could ever achieve. Nyxthalin, who had remained silent through most of the game, looked at Zorax with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. "You were right, Zorax," she said quietly. "There is more to humanity than we first understood. This tradition, it carries meaning." Zorax nodded, a sense of satisfaction filling him. He had come to understand something fundamental about humanity, something that no amount of logic or political diplomacy could ever convey. Doug Farley had shown them that sometimes the most important thing isn't how you win, it's the connection you make along the way. The council session continued into the night, but for Zorax, the moment had already been made. Doug Farley had succeeded where others had failed, not with strategy or intellect, but with something far more powerful, his humanity. As the delegates slowly filtered out of the chamber, Zorax found himself watching Doug, who was still grinning from ear to ear, surrounded by new allies and understanding. Maybe the galaxy wasn't so different from humanity after all. The Galactic Council was never one to shy away from controversy, but after the raucous success of the baseball exchange, the stakes had shifted. What had started as a cultural experiment, Doug Farley's passionate, somewhat absurd introduction of humanity's favorite pastime, was beginning to resonate in ways the Council had never anticipated. The tension was building, and not just within the Council chambers, but across the galaxy. For the first time in history, the galactic leaders weren't just watching the humans, they were beginning to study them. Doug Farley's influence, while initially seen as an odd curiosity, was now viewed as a political tool, a powerful one, and not just for the Council. Farley's actions had begun to ripple outward, catching the attention of both allies and enemies of the Galactic Council. Zorax sat in his quarters late one evening, reviewing the data from the most recent session. The human ambassador had surprised everyone by not only securing his position, but also deepening the interspecies dialogue with a simple yet profound action, showing the galaxy what humanity could feel, what they could care about. It wasn't an abstract ideal. It was visceral, immediate. Baseball had bridged the gap. But now something new was brewing in the atmosphere, a shift that Zorax couldn't yet fully understand. He replayed the final moments of the game in his mind. Doug's impromptu high-five, the eruption of cheers, the raw emotion in the council chamber as the Cubs secured their victory. Zorax felt a strange sense of pride for Doug Farley, but pride wasn't enough. In the face of growing tensions, Zorax had a job to do, ensuring that Doug's unorthodox approach wasn't viewed as a liability. The Praxians, in particular, were growing more vocal in their opposition. Nyxthalan had always been a vocal critic, but now, her dissatisfaction seemed to be shared by several other species who found Doug's influence unsettling. They saw it as a challenge to the established norms of the Galactic Council, where reason and order reigned supreme. They feared that Doug's emotional sway would unravel the meticulous diplomacy that had kept the peace for centuries. Zorax could feel the pressure mounting. What began as a simple cultural exchange was now entwined with galactic politics. Doug's unyielding loyalty to his team, his personal connection to humanity's past, those were the qualities that had earned him the ambassadorship, but they were also the very traits that made him a target. Could these human emotions that had impressed the Council become his downfall? As Zorax brooded over these questions, a soft chime from his communication device interrupted his thoughts. It was an encrypted message from Doug Farley himself. Zorax, I need to talk. It's about the Cubs, but more than that, it's about the future of humanity. I know the Council's been watching me, but I can't shake the feeling that something coming, something big. They need to understand us, Zorax, not just the game, not just the culture. They need to understand why we fight, why we never give up. I'm more than ready to take on this job, but I don't want it to be on their terms. I want it to be on our terms. Doug. Zorax read the message twice. It wasn't just a call for help, it was a warning. Doug Farley was no longer just an ambassador. He was a man who had embraced the weight of his species' hopes, and that weight was beginning to strain under the pressure of galactic politics. The Council had been cautious about allowing humanity into their ranks. They had allowed Doug's unconventional methods to work. But now, there were rumors of factions forming within the Council, alliances that viewed Doug's influence as a threat to their authority. Zorax knew what he had to do. He had to act before the Council became divided beyond repair. Doug wasn't just representing humanity's voice in the Council chambers. He was becoming a symbol, one that could unite and fracture all at once. Zorax needed to ensure that Doug was protected, politically, culturally, and emotionally. The next day, Zorax met Doug at a private location on the Council's orbital station, far away from the eyes of the public and the prying Council members. Doug was sitting at a table, his usual jovial demeanor replaced with a look of deep contemplation. His Cub's cap was tilted back slightly, and his eyes had the distant, unfocused look of a man grappling with too much at once. Zorax, Doug said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. You know something's coming, don't you? Zorax sat down, meeting Doug's gaze. I do. The Council is growing uneasy with your influence. Some of the species are becoming concerned that your emotional ties to baseball are undermining your diplomatic role. They see it as a distraction, something that doesn't belong in their politics. Doug chuckled dryly, running a hand through his hair. I figured as much. The thing is, Zorax, they don't get it. They see us as this collection of chaotic beings driven by emotions. They think we're impulsive, erratic, weak, but they've missed the point. Our strength is in our ability to feel, to care about something beyond ourselves. That's what makes us human. Zorax nodded thoughtfully. I understand, Doug, and I think the Council is starting to understand too. But there's one thing they don't fully realize: your loyalty to the Cubs, your unwavering belief in tradition and community. That is not a weakness. It's what will unite the galaxy, but only if we can convince them of that before it's too late. Doug's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. So what do we do? You're saying the Council about to turn on me. I'm not saying it's certain, but the Praxians are gathering support. They feel threatened by your influence, and they're using your connection to baseball as a way to undermine you. We need to act swiftly, Doug. You need to show them that your connection to this sport, your devotion to it, is a symbol of humanity's resilience, not a distraction. Doug was silent for a long moment. Then his lips curled into a slight grin. So what you're saying is, we need to bring the Cubs to the Council, not just the game, but the whole tradition. Zorax's mind clicked into place. Exactly, not just a game, you bring them everything. The emotions, the community, the way humanity rallies together, not just for victory, but for each other. It's what sets you apart from other species. It's your humanity, Doug. Doug's eyes gleamed with a renewed sense of purpose. Then we're gonna show them exactly what that means, all of it. Let's make them understand why I said no in the first place. Let's show them what humanity really is. Zorax stood up, his posture straightening. I'll make the arrangements. We can't waste any more time. If we're going to win this, it has to be soon. Doug looked up at Zorax, his face serious now. We can win this, Zorax. I'm ready. But we have to do it on our terms, or else what's the point? Zorax's mandibles twitched, and he gave Doug a solemn nod. We'll do it your way, together. As the days passed, the preparations for the cultural exchange became even more elaborate. Doug's vision was taking shape, and Zorax worked tirelessly behind the scenes, securing resources, reaching out to sympathetic delegates, and preparing to challenge the entrenched opposition. But as the day of the next council meeting loomed closer, Zorax could feel the tension rising. The Praxians were organizing, and they weren't going to back down without a fight. But neither would Doug Farley, and neither would humanity. Zorax knew that the next few cycles would determine everything. The stakes were higher than ever before. If Doug's vision succeeded, humanity would have its place among the stars. If it failed, the galaxy would turn its back on them forever. But Doug wasn't about to let that happen, and neither was Zorax. The Galactic Council chambers hummed with the low buzz of political tension as the day of the next session arrived. Zorax had seen the warning signs for weeks: quiet whispers among the Praxian diplomats, subtle shifts in the body language of the more reserved species. There was no doubt in his mind anymore. Doug Farley was not just an ambassador. He had become a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. Zorax arrived early, his mind preoccupied with the looming storm. The Praxians, led by Nyxthalan, had been laying the groundwork for a political maneuver that could derail Doug's appointment entirely. What had once been a passionate call to embrace humanity's values, tradition, loyalty, and community, was now viewed as a threat to the carefully balanced order of the Council. These emotions, these deeply human ideals, were unpredictable, and that, in the eyes of some species, was unacceptable. Doug had been steadfast, continuing his preparations for the cultural exchange. His message to the Council was clear: humanity would not be subdued or ignored. His devotion to the Cubs was not a weakness, it was their strength. Zorax admired Doug's determination, but even he knew that this conflict was escalating beyond their control. As Zorax entered the council chambers, the usual quiet reverence was replaced by a palpable sense of urgency. The representatives were already gathered, and the atmosphere was thick with the weight of something unsaid. Zorax's sharp eyes caught Nyxthalan sitting at the center of the room, flanked by several other species who had been vocal in their opposition to Doug's approach. The Tigran ambassador, always a more measured voice, leaned toward Zorax as he took his seat. "There is trouble on the horizon," the Tigran said quietly, his golden eyes watching Nyxthalan. "The Praxians have been stirring up dissent. You should prepare yourself." Zorax nodded, his antennae twitching in anticipation. The moment had arrived. There was no turning back now. The Supreme Counselor, a towering figure of translucent blue skin and multiple limbs, stepped forward to address the assembly. We are gathered here today to discuss the human proposal to bring their tradition of baseball into the council chambers. It is an unprecedented request, but one that we, as a collective, have agreed to consider. The room fell silent as the Supreme Councilor's gaze swept across the gathered delegates, but Zorax could feel the tension building in the air. This wasn't going to be a simple discussion. Doug's fate and humanity's future would be decided here in this very chamber. We have listened to the arguments for and against this cultural exchange, the Supreme Councilor continued. Now it is time for a decision. Zorax knew that this wasn't just about baseball anymore. This was a referendum on humanity itself. Would the galaxy accept humans, chaotic, emotional, irrational, as true equals in the interstellar community? Or would they be seen as too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed a seat at the table? Before anyone could speak, Nyxthalan rose, her four limbs raised in an almost ceremonial fashion. Her presence commanded attention. "Fellow delegates," Nyxthalan began, her voice as cold as ever, "we must ask ourselves, what kind of example are we setting for the galaxy by indulging in these primitive rituals? Baseball is a distraction, a childish pastime that has no place in serious diplomatic discourse." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Doug, who was sitting at the far end of the room, looking calm but clearly tense. Doug's Cubs cap sat atop his head like a crown, but his posture had shifted. Zorax could sense the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Humanity's traditions," Nyxthalan continued, her voice rising in intensity, "are unworthy of our attention. We should be focused on the greater good of the galaxy. Allowing such a trivial tradition to infiltrate our sacred chambers undermines the very foundation of the Galactic Council. We are here to advance civilization, not to indulge in the nostalgic whims of a single species." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, with several representatives nodding in solemn approval. Zorax felt his heart sink. This wasn't just an attack on Doug, it was an attack on everything humanity stood for. But Doug wasn't backing down. He stood up, his voice steady but laced with passion. "I didn't come here to play games. I came here to represent humanity, and part of being human is understanding that the things we care about, the things we fight for, are sometimes more important than politics, more important than strategy. We are not a species defined by efficiency. We are defined by what we hold dear, and for me, that's baseball." He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something he wasn't sure he would find. "I won't apologize for it. I can't. And I don't think I should have to. Humanity's strength is in our hearts, not in our heads. And if the galaxy can't understand that, then maybe we're not ready to join your ranks after all." The room fell into stunned silence. Zorax could feel the weight of those words, the defiance in Doug's voice. Doug had just made his stand, not just as an ambassador, but as a human, and in doing so, he had drawn a line in the sand. He wasn't going to play by the rules of the galaxy. He was going to change the game. But it was Nyxthalan's next words that struck like a lightning bolt. "We have been patient," she said, her voice low and venomous. "But humanity's behavior has made it clear that they cannot be trusted to adhere to the rules of this council. Your emotional attachments, your unyielding devotion to trivial matters are a liability. I propose that humanity's seat in the council be revoked. Let them return to their primitive state and figure out their game for themselves." The shockwaves of her words rippled through the room. Zorax's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The betrayal had been set in motion. Nyxthalan was making her play, and it was clear that Doug Farley, and by extension humanity, was at risk of being cast aside. Doug's face hardened, his expression no longer that of a hopeful ambassador, but of a man who had just been told he didn't belong. He met Zorax's gaze across the room, his eyes filled with resolve. Doug didn't need to say anything for Zorax to know that the fight had only just begun. The Tigran delegate who had supported Doug earlier stood up, his golden eyes flashing with defiance. "I disagree with the Praxian delegate," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "To deny humanity's place in this council would be to deny the very values we stand for: freedom, choice, and the right to exist on one's own terms." The Praxian delegates bristled, their chitinous limbs clacking in agitation. The room was no longer divided along logical lines. It was divided along the emotional divide that Doug had brought to the forefront. The debate raged on, but Zorax knew one thing for sure. The council was fractured. Doug Farley had managed to do what no diplomat had done before. He had turned a game into a battlefield. And now, the real fight for humanity's future was about to begin. Zorax left the chambers that day with a sinking feeling in his gut. The betrayal had begun, but so had the battle. The Praxians and their allies were relentless, and the fight for Doug's place, for humanity's place, in the galactic community was just starting. Zorax knew one thing: this was no longer about baseball. It was about something far bigger. As the doors to the council chambers closed behind him, Zorax caught a glimpse of Doug standing tall, his cub's cap still perched atop his head. Doug Farley had not come this far to give up now, and neither would Zorax. The tension in the galactic council chambers had never been so palpable. The debate raged on, each faction fiercely defending its stance, but the truth was becoming clearer with every passing moment. The Praxians, led by Nyxthalan, had thrown their weight behind the motion to expel humanity, citing Doug Farley's emotional attachment to baseball as a dangerous liability to the stability of the council. Zorax stood at the back of the chamber, his 6 eyes scanning the room. He could see Doug standing at the front, his body language calm but his eyes burning with a quiet intensity. Doug had fought for humanity's place in the galaxy before, but now the stakes were higher than ever. Doug Farley was no longer just an ambassador. He was humanity's last line of defense, and his battle was far from over. Zorax knew that this fight wasn't just about baseball, it was about human values. It was about what made humanity different from the cold logic of the galactic powers around them. Loyalty, tradition, community. These things were not weaknesses, they were strengths, but could the rest of the galaxy see that? Nyxthalan was not backing down. She spoke again, her voice colder than ever. The Council cannot afford to let a species driven by irrational emotions guide our collective future. Humanity's actions, this obsession with a game, are proof of their instability. A race that cannot control its impulses has no place here. Doug stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with a kind of fierce determination. I've heard what you've said, Nyx, but you're missing the point. This is not about baseball. This is about what it means to be human. We may not always follow your rules of logic, but we don't need to. We don't want to. We're driven by something deeper, something that you can't measure with your algorithms or your strategies. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Doug's words were simple, but there was a power in them, a truth that the other species hadn't been willing to acknowledge. For the first time, Doug wasn't just speaking for humanity. He was speaking for something universal, the need to feel, to connect, to belong. Zorax could feel the room shift, if only slightly. Some of the more empathetic delegates, such as the Glavathi, had already begun to nod in agreement. They saw what Zorax had seen all along. The very thing that made Doug Farley's approach so unorthodox was the same thing that made him valuable. Doug wasn't just a representative of humanity's strengths. He was a reflection of their heart. Humanity has something that the rest of us don't fully understand yet, Doug continued, his voice growing stronger. We fight, we fail, we get knocked down, but we don't quit, we don't give up. And we do it together. You think that's irrational? Well, maybe that's the kind of irrationality the galaxy needs. Nyxthalan's eyes narrowed. Your stubbornness will be your undoing, Doug Farley. This, she gestured to the holographic projection of Wrigley Field, still shining brightly in the corner of the chamber. This tradition is just a distraction. You're not leading your people, you're indulging them. Doug's expression softened, but his eyes never wavered from Nyxthalan. Maybe, but you know what? If we didn't have our distractions, our games, our traditions, our loyalties, we wouldn't have anything at all. And that's the truth. We may be messy, we may be chaotic, but we have each other, and that's what makes us human. The room fell silent. Zorax felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time, he wasn't just an observer. He wasn't just watching Doug as a diplomat or as a representative. He was watching Doug Farley as human, as a symbol of everything that made humanity unique. And in that moment, Zorax realized something profound. The galaxy didn't need humanity to fit into its mold. Humanity needed to show the galaxy why its messiness, its irrationality, was something worth preserving. Then the unexpected happened. The Tigran delegate, who had been mostly silent during the proceedings, stood. His golden eyes gleamed with determination. I agree with Doug, the Tigran said, his voice deep and resonant. What we are witnessing here is not just a clash of political ideologies, it's a clash of cultures. Humanity may be imperfect, but it is precisely that imperfection that makes them valuable. We have watched them build connections, inspire loyalty, and rally behind something as simple as a game. There is a strength in that, a strength that the galaxy has overlooked. Zorax could see the shock in Nyxthalin's eyes as the Tigrin's words echoed through the chamber. Slowly, others began to speak up, each adding their voice to the growing chorus of support for Doug and humanity. The Glavathi, the Andromedans, even the Seraphine, their silence was broken by murmurs of understanding. Zorax felt the tide turning. Slowly but surely, Doug Farley was winning this battle, not through force or diplomacy, but through the sheer power of his humanity. After what seemed like an eternity, the Supreme Counselor finally spoke. "It is clear that this debate has reached an impasse," the Supreme Counselor said, his voice cutting through the room. "We have heard both sides, and while the Praxians and their allies remain unconvinced, the support for Doug Farley's approach cannot be denied. The Council has decided." Zorax held his breath. Doug Farley will remain humanity's ambassador. The cultural exchange will continue, and humanity will be given the opportunity to prove that their loyalty, tradition, and emotional strength are valuable assets to the galactic community. The room erupted in a mix of applause, murmurs, and murmurs of dissatisfaction. Zorax glanced at Doug, whose face lit up with disbelief and then pride. Doug had done it. Against all odds, he had turned the tide, not through logic or diplomacy, but through the one thing that made humanity truly unique, their heart. The aftermath was a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and planning. Doug Farley's ambassadorship was secured, but the work had only just begun. Zorax found himself at the center of a new challenge, helping humanity integrate fully into the galactic community, ensuring that Doug's influence didn't become a symbol of division but a force for unity. But as Zorax stood next to Doug in the council chambers, watching the human representatives shake hands with the various delegates, Zorax couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Humanity had proven that they were more than just chaotic, emotional beings. They were capable of loyalty, resilience, and connection. And in a galaxy that often valued cold logic and efficiency above all else, that was a power worth embracing. Doug Farley had not only secured his place among the stars, he had shown the galaxy that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the mind, but in the heart. And as Doug turned to Zorax, a grin spreading across his face, Zorax knew that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. "I told you we'd get there, Zorax," Doug said, his voice filled with satisfaction. Zorax smiled in return, a rare moment of warmth spreading through him. "Yes, Doug, you did." And for the first time, Zorax understood. It wasn't about baseball. It was about the connections, the emotions, and the irrational, beautiful mess of what it meant to be human. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and together they would shape the future of the galaxy. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.